On the side of the road in the Weeping Peninsula, you meet a blind girl named Irina. She's alone, scared. She asks you to deliver a letter to her father at Castle Morne. It's a simple request, a side quest. You head to the castle expecting a routine delivery, but when you arrive, the castle is covered in blood. The soldiers are dead. The halls are filled with monsters. And when you finally find Edgar, Irina's father, he's standing at the top of a tower, refusing to leave. He won't go to his daughter. He can't abandon his duty. So you deliver the letter and leave. When you return to Irina, she's dead on the side of the road. Her eyes have been gouged out. And Edgar? He loses his mind. He becomes Edgar the Revenger, hunting you across the lands because he blames you for her death. This is the complete story of Castle Morne, a fortress built on slavery, a revolt led by the Misbegotten, and a father who chose duty over love. By the end, you'll understand why everyone in this story lost. The slaves, the soldiers, the daughter, the father. Castle Morne is a tragedy where there are no heroes, only corpses. The Weeping Peninsula is often the first region a Tarnished explores after leaving the initial chaos of Limgrave. It is a land defined by constant rain, foggy cliffs, and a strange, somber beauty. Most players come here seeking a reprieve from the challenges of the mainland, but they quickly find a landscape that feels heavy with grief. The very name of the peninsula suggests a place that cannot stop mourning. It is a secluded corner of the lands between that seems to have been left behind by the grace of the Erdtree, serving as a quiet graveyard for old ambitions and forgotten sins. At the southernmost tip of this land sits Castle Morne. It is a massive, jagged fortress that looms over the sea like a silent guardian. To a passing traveller, it looks like a standard monument to the military might of the Golden Order. However, this castle hides a systemic horror that defines the true nature of the peninsula. It was not built just to defend against invaders from the sea. It was built to be the primary site for the subjugation of the impure. It was a vital strategic point for the Erdtree, but its foundations were laid on the backs of those deemed unworthy of life. Beneath the grand ramparts and the banners of the monarchy, Castle Morne was a pressure cooker of institutional cruelty. It functioned as a dumping ground for the people that the Golden Order wanted to forget. While the rest of the world looked toward the capital and the glory of the Elden Ring, the peninsula became a massive processing center for the unwanted. It was a place where racial tension and ancient hatreds were allowed to fester in the damp, salty air. The castle was the high point of a society that maintained its purity by stepping on the necks of those it considered less than human. The secret of the peninsula is that the peace was always a lie. The stability of the region was maintained through a brutal hierarchy that treated an entire race of beings as disposable tools. For centuries, the Lords of Morne oversaw a system of absolute control, believing that their divine right protected them from the consequences of their actions. They saw themselves as civilized masters and their servants as animalistic property. This arrogance created a divide that could never be mended by words. It could only be resolved through a violent and bloody reckoning that had been building since the dawn of the Erdtree. As you cross the bridge of sacrifice, you are stepping into a story where the cycle of oppression has finally reached its breaking point. The peninsula is no longer just a place of rain and fog. It is a place of blood and fire. The darkest secret of Castle Morne is about to be revealed to the world. It is a story of a rebellion that was as inevitable as the tide. You are entering a microcosm of the entire lands between, a place where the pursuit of order led to a nightmare of chaos. The tragedy of the Weeping Land is that the tears were never for the victims, but for the collapse of the system that killed them. The first human face you encounter on this journey is Irina. She sits on a lonely rock just past the Bridge of Sacrifice, looking small and fragile against the backdrop of the rainy hills. She is blind and dressed in blood-stained rags, a stark contrast to the noble heritage her speech suggests. Irina is a girl caught in a world she can no longer see and can barely understand. She explains that she has fled a rebellion at the castle, but her voice lacks the bitterness or rage you might expect from a refugee. She speaks with a quiet, terrifying innocence that makes her vulnerability feel even more profound. Irina represents the innocent casualty of the Golden Order's rigid hierarchy. She is a Carian noble by blood, the daughter of a commander, and a beneficiary of the very system that is currently being torn apart. Yet, she seems completely unaware of the atrocities her father oversaw. To her, the castle was simply her home, and the servants were just a background element of her comfortable life. She doesn't understand why the world has suddenly turned to fire. Her blindness is both physical and metaphorical. She is a victim of a war she didn't start, caught in the crossfire of a vengeance she doesn't think she earned. She hands the player a letter intended for her father, Edgar. Her plea is simple. She wants her father to leave his post and join her so they can flee the peninsula together. She is the only person left who truly cares about Edgar as a man rather than a commander. Her hope is the last light in a region that is rapidly going dark. Irina believes that family is more important than duty, and she trusts that her father will feel the same way once he reads her words. She sits by the road and waits, a blind girl hoping for a rescue that the world is no longer capable of providing. Her presence on the road is a tragic bit of environmental storytelling. She is sitting in a spot where roving bands of misbegotten and brigands frequently pass. She is defenseless, relying entirely on the mercy of strangers and the fading protection of her name. The blood on her dress is a warning of the violence she has already escaped, but she seems to believe that the worst is behind her. She is a character defined by a desperate, misplaced faith in the old world. She thinks that because she is a daughter of the castle, the laws of the castle will somehow keep her safe on the open road. Irina is the emotional anchor of the Castle Morne questline. Without her, the conflict at the fortress would just be another military skirmish between two groups of monsters. She gives the violence a human cost. When you take her letter, you are taking on the burden of her hope. You are the bridge between a daughter's love and a father's obsession. Irina represents the tragedy of being born on the wrong side of history. She is a gentle soul in a system of glass and iron, and the rain of the peninsula is already starting to wash away the footprints of the life she thought she had. Castle Morne is a masterpiece of grim architecture. It sits at the edge of the world, a massive pile of stone designed to project absolute power over the surrounding sea and land. But as you approach its gates, the true purpose of the structure becomes clear. It was not built for the comfort of kings. It was built to be a prison and a work camp. The layout of the castle is a nightmare of verticality and confinement. There are no grand gardens or open plazas here. Instead, there are cramped quarters, narrow walkways, and massive pits designed for the efficient disposal of corpses. It is a place of functional cruelty. The castle served as the end of the line for those deemed unworthy of the Erdtree's grace. In the Golden Order's theology, there was no room for the impure, but the state still needed labor. Castle Morne was where that labor was extracted. It functioned as a processing center for the misbegotten and other social outcasts. They were used as beasts of burden to maintain the legendary defenses of the fortress. They repaired the walls, hauled the supplies, and worked the forges in the dark. The architecture itself was a tool of oppression, designed to keep the servile class under constant surveillance and at a constant disadvantage. The power dynamics before the revolt were absolute. A small number of soldiers and a single castellan ruled over a massive population of slaves. They maintained control through fear and the belief that they were divinely sanctioned to rule. The soldiers walked the high ramparts in the sun, while the misbegotten lived in the damp shadows of the lower courtyards. This physical separation of space was a constant reminder of the social order. The castle was a physical manifestation of the Golden Order's philosophy, the high and the pure sitting atop the low and the broken. It was an ecosystem of exploitation that lasted for generations. Strategically, the castle was vital because it guarded the southern reach of the lands between. It was the shield of the peninsula. But the lords of the Erdtree made a fatal mistake. They believed that a fortress built on slavery was a secure foundation. They invested in thick stone walls and heavy iron gates, but they ignored the pressure cooker of rage that was building inside those walls. The very strength of the castle became its undoing. When the revolt finally happened, the soldiers found themselves trapped inside their own masterpiece, surrounded by thousands of enemies who knew every secret passage and dark corner of the work camp. When you walk through the halls of Morne today, you are walking through a tomb. The architecture still speaks of order, but the blood on the walls speaks of a reckoning. The massive pits that once held the bodies of worked-to-death slaves are now filled with the bodies of the masters. The strategic importance of the castle is gone, replaced by its role as a monument to a failed philosophy. It stands as a warning to all of the lands between. It shows that no matter how thick your walls are, you cannot keep the darkness out if you have already let it grow in the hearts of the people you have enslaved. The misbegotten are among the most tragic creatures in all of Elden Ring, for they are beings born with a chaotic mix of bestial features: wings, scales, tails, and feathers. In a world governed by the Golden Order, which prizes purity and a singular human-like form, the misbegotten are viewed as walking blasphemies. They are considered mistakes of nature, impure beings who have been denied the dignity of a soul or a place in the Erdtree's cycle of rebirth. They are the physical evidence of a reality that the gods want to erase, a living reminder of an older and messier world. Lore implies that the misbegotten are throwbacks to the Crucible. This was the primordial era of the lands between, a time before the Erdtree, when all life was blended together in a chaotic soup of potential. The features the misbegotten carry, the wings of a bird, the scales of a lizard, are remnants of this ancient blending. Because the Golden Order defines itself by the rejection of the Crucible, anyone born with these features is automatically classified as a monster. They are not seen as people with an unfortunate condition. They are seen as a biological regression that must be suppressed and controlled. This status as less than human meant they were treated as chattel. Throughout the lands between, the misbegotten were used as slaves and beasts of burden. They were never granted names, only labels. They were the ones who did the work that was too dangerous or too degrading for the followers of the grace. In Castle Morne, they were the fuel that kept the machine running. They were worked until they dropped, and their bodies were thrown into pits like trash. Their animalistic appearance was used as a justification for their treatment. The masters told themselves that because the misbegotten looked like beasts, they deserved to be treated like beasts. The deep irony of the misbegotten is that their impurity actually gives them a strength that the golden soldiers lack. Their connection to the crucible makes them physically powerful, resilient, and fiercely communal. They share a bond of suffering that the lords of the Erd Tree could never understand. They are not mindless animals, though they were forced to live like them. They possess a culture of survival and a deep-seated memory of the era when they were not considered mistakes. They waited for centuries in the shadows of the castles, watching for the moment when the golden light would flicker and the masters would become vulnerable. The misbegotten represent the ultimate failure of the Golden Order's attempt to sanitize the world. You cannot prune away the roots of life without the tree eventually collapsing. By treating these beings as monsters, the gods created the very monsters that would eventually destroy them. The misbegotten are the ghosts of the crucible, returning to claim their place in a world that tried to build a paradise on their graves. They exist because life is more complex than a golden ring, and their revolt at Castle Morne was the first scream of a species that was finally tired of being a footnote in someone else's legend. Edgar is the commander of Castle Morne, the man tasked with maintaining order in the most volatile prison in the south. He is a knight of the old school, a man whose entire identity is wrapped up in his title and his duty to his lord. When the player finds him, he is sitting on a high rampart, looking out at the ruins of his command. Even as the smoke rises from the courtyards and the screams of his dying men echo through the halls, Edgar remains at his post. He is a man paralyzed by a rigid and outdated sense of honor, unable to reconcile the reality of the revolt with the rules he has lived by his entire life. His character is a tragic study in the dangers of institutional blindness. Edgar does not see the misbegotten as people with legitimate grievances. He refers to them as vermin and beasts. To him, their revolt is not a revolution. It is a theft. They have stolen his master's castle and his master's property, and his only goal is to take it back. He stays at the castle not because he thinks he can win, but because he believes that leaving would be a stain on his soul. He has been trained to value the Castellan's duty above everything else, including his own life and the life of his daughter. This obsession with duty is what ultimately blinded him to the imminent death of his family. While he was sitting on his rampart, clutching his sword and waiting for reinforcements that were never coming, his daughter Irina was sitting on a rock in a war zone. Edgar believed that as long as he held the castle, he was fulfilling his role as a father and a protector. He couldn't see that the castle was already a tomb. He was protecting a pile of stone, while the only person who actually loved him was rotting in the rain. His honor was a wall that prevented him from seeing the truth until it was far too late. A Castellan's responsibility is to be the shield of the fortress, but Edgar took this to a pathological extreme. He viewed the loss of the castle as a personal sin. He felt that if he abandoned his post, he would be no better than the impure creatures he was fighting. He was more afraid of being a failure in the eyes of his invisible lords than he was of being a failure as a father. This is the quintessence of the Golden Order's grip on the mind. It replaces natural human instincts with a cold, abstract loyalty to a system that doesn't even know your name. Edgar was a good soldier, and that is exactly why he was a terrible man. When the player delivers Irina's letter, the cracks in Edgar's armor finally begin to show. But even then, he hesitates. He is a man torn between two worlds, the world of the Castellan and the world of Edgar the Father. The tragedy of his character is that he waited for permission to be a father. He waited until a stranger told him the castle was lost before he allowed himself to think about his daughter. He is a cautionary tale about the cost of absolute loyalty. Edgar failed his duty because he didn't realize that his most important post wasn't a rampart, but the road where his daughter was waiting for him. The legendary treasure of Castle Morne is the grafted blade greatsword, a weapon that serves as a physical manifestation of the Golden Order's history of conquest. It is not a single sword, but a mass of blades taken from a lost country's champions, fused together into a jagged, heavy slab of iron. It is a trophy of war. It represents the moment the Golden Order crushed a rival culture and melted down their honor into a tool of execution. It is a weapon designed to intimidate as much as to kill. It is a heavy, ugly reminder that the current world was built on the wreckage of the old one. Edgar's obsession with this sword is the primary reason he refuses to leave the castle. He believes that the sword is the soul of the fortress. In his mind, the castle hasn't truly fallen as long as the grafted blade is still in his possession. He cannot allow the Misbegotten, beings he views as subhuman vermin, to touch a weapon that represents the military dominance of the gods. To Edgar, the sword is a holy relic of the hierarchy. If the slaves take the sword, it isn't just a lost battle. It is a symbolic reversal of the entire natural order. He is willing to sacrifice everything to keep that hunk of iron out of impure hands. The term grafted carries a heavy weight in Elden Ring. It implies a forced, unnatural union of disparate parts. Just as Godric the Grafted stitches limbs to his body to gain power, the grafted blade greatsword stitches together the symbols of defeated nations to create a singular image of authority. It is a weapon of oppression because it is literally made of the failures of others. It is a constant reminder to the inhabitants of the castle that resistance is futile. It says that the Golden Order has already conquered everyone else, and it will conquer you too. It is a sword that breathes the air of a tyrant. Losing the sword would be a political disaster for Edgar. He isn't just a commander, he is a custodian of the state's prestige. If word got back to the capital that a band of beasts had stolen the legendary Sword of Morne, his family name would be ruined forever. This fear of shame is a more powerful motivator for Edgar than the safety of his daughter. He is a man who would rather be a dead hero than a living coward. He treats the sword with a religious reverence, unaware that to the Misbegotten, the sword is just a heavy piece of the cage they are finally breaking. The tragedy of the sword is that it is ultimately just a piece of metal. It has no magical power to save Irina or restore the castle. It is a symbol that has become more important than the reality it was meant to represent. Edgar is guarding a ghost. The lost country the swords came from is long gone, and the champions who wielded them are dust. By clinging to the sword, Edgar is clinging to a past that has already abandoned him. The grafted blade is the anchor that is pulling him down into the depths of the madness that is about to consume the entire peninsula. The revolt at Castle Morne was not a random riot or a sudden outburst of mindless violence. It was a calculated explosion of centuries of pent-up rage. For generations, the Misbegotten had been treated as animals, worked to death in the shadows of the fortress. They had no names, no rights, and no hope. But they did have a memory. They remembered the crucible, and they remembered their own strength. They waited for the moment when the Golden Order was at its weakest. The shattering provided that moment. With the demigods at war and the capital in chaos, the grip of the masters on the peninsula finally began to slip. They rose up simultaneously, an organized strike that caught the garrison completely off guard. The Misbegotten used their superior physical strength and their animalistic ferocity to turn the castle's own architecture against the soldiers. They knew the cramped tunnels and the dark pits better than any knight ever could. They moved like a tide of claws and feathers, swarming the barracks and the ramparts before the alarm could even be fully raised. It was the day the beasts stopped being beasts and started being soldiers. They used the very tools they had been forced to haul to beat their masters to death. The violence was fueled by a desperation that the Golden Order could not comprehend. The Misbegotten weren't fighting for territory or runes. They were fighting for the right to exist. They saw the soldiers not as men, but as the physical embodiment of their chains. The revolt was an act of unmaking. They wanted to tear down every symbol of the authority that had crushed them. They smashed the statues, burned the banners, and turned the noble courtyards into slaughterhouses. It was a total rejection of the order that had defined their lives. They were finally speaking, and they were speaking in the language of blood. The demoralized and undersupplied soldiers of the peninsula stood no chance. Most of them were common men, far from the light of the capital, already exhausted by the rain and the isolation of their post. When the servants they had looked down on for years suddenly became their executioners, the soldiers broke. The environmental storytelling in the castle shows a garrison that died in a state of absolute terror. They were cornered in their rooms and butchered in the halls. The castle, which was built to keep people out, became a cage that kept the soldiers in. The masters were finally experiencing the confinement they had imposed on others. The slave revolt at Morne was a localized success, but it was also a warning shot for the entire world. It proved that the Golden Order was no longer eternal. The impure were capable of winning. As the Misbegotten stood atop the piles of golden-clad corpses, the air of the peninsula changed. The smell of the rain was replaced by the smell of iron and rot. The age of slavery at Morne had ended in a single night of absolute horizontal violence. The Misbegotten had reclaimed their home, but in doing so, they had turned the castle into a ruin that could never be rebuilt. They had won their freedom, but they had also unleashed a chaos that would eventually consume everyone involved. When you first step through the gates of Castle Morne, the scale of the massacre is overwhelming. The air is thick with flies and the heavy, sweet scent of rotting meat. This was not a clean military takeover. It was a total collapse of human civilization within these walls. You find soldiers of the Golden Order piled in massive, undignified heaps in the center of the courtyard, their golden surcoats stained black with dried blood. The Misbegotten are not just occupying the castle, they are desecrating it. You see them perched atop the ruins, feasting on the remains of their former masters with a primal, terrifying hunger. The environmental storytelling reveals a savagery that was born from generations of silent abuse. The Misbegotten did not just kill the soldiers, they dismantled them. They mimicked the very violence they had endured. For every slave that was thrown into a pit during the castle's history, a soldier was hacked apart and left to rot in the sun. The slaves have reclaimed their agency through the only language they were ever taught, the language of the beast. The refined halls of the nobility are now covered in filth and offal, a physical rejection of the cleanliness and order that the Erd Tree demanded. The conflict within the castle was absolute. On one side, you had soldiers who were fighting for a concept of duty and a social hierarchy that had already abandoned them. On the other, you had a race of beings fighting for the sheer, raw pleasure of revenge. The Misbegotten utilized their wings and claws to strike from the shadows of the rafters, swarming the heavy-armored knights who were too slow to react in the cramped corridors. The death toll was total. There are no prisoners in Castle Morne. There are only those who were eaten and those who are still waiting to be found. Walking through the barracks, you see the remnants of desperate final stands. Tables are overturned, and broken swords litter the floor. It is clear that the soldiers died in a state of absolute shock. They had looked down on the Misbegotten for so long that they literally could not imagine them being capable of such a coordinated strike. Their arrogance was their executioner. The massacre was the final proof that the beasts were always more dangerous than the masters believed. The Golden Order had built its fortress on a foundation of sleeping wolves, and when those wolves finally woke up, they tore the throat out of the peninsula. The aftermath of the massacre has turned the castle into a stagnant tomb. The rain of the peninsula washes the blood into the sea, but the stains on the stone remain. The Misbegotten now roam the ramparts as the new lords of the ruin, but they are lords without a purpose. They have achieved their revenge, but they have no city to build and no future to plan. They are survivors in a world of corpses. The massacre at Morne was the ultimate unmaking of the region, a bloody transition where the slaves became the butchers and the castle became a monument to the absolute failure of institutional cruelty. The letter Irina gives you is the cruel hope that drives this questline. It is a simple, handwritten plea from a daughter to her father, begging him to return and be by her side. When you carry this letter through the blood-soaked courtyards of the castle, it feels like a fragile thing. It is a scrap of paper that represents a world of domestic love and peace that simply no longer exists. Irina's words are filled with a desperate faith in the old bonds of family. She believes that if her father just reads her letter, he will see reason and leave the madness of the castle behind. The dramatic irony of this letter is heart-wrenching. By the time you actually reach Edgar at the top of the ramparts, the time for leaving has already passed. The castle is lost, the men are dead, and the peninsula is in total revolt. The letter is a message from a world that died hours or days ago. Irina hoped that her father would come to save her, but the delay caused by Edgar's obsession with his duty has already made her hope irrelevant. Every minute you spend fighting through the Misbegotten to deliver this paper is a minute that Irina is sitting alone and defenseless on a road filled with killers. When Edgar finally holds the letter, he is forced to confront the reality he has been trying to ignore. He reads the words of a daughter who loves him, and for a moment, the Castellan disappears. He realizes that while he was guarding a hunk of iron, he was neglecting the only thing that gave his life actual meaning. But the tragedy of missed timing is the core of this story. You are delivering a lifeline to a man who has already let the person on the other end drown. The letter is not a solution. It is a reminder of a failure that can never be undone. The contents of the letter also highlight Irina's tragic blindness. She writes as if her father is simply at work, unaware that he is overseeing a slaughter. She doesn't understand the political or racial weight of the conflict. She just wants her dad. This innocence makes the letter feel even more painful. It is a pure request in a corrupted world. The delay in its delivery is the mechanical expression of the Golden Order's failure. The law moves too slowly to save the people. By the time the message arrives, the recipient has already lost the world he was supposed to protect. Ultimately, the letter serves as the pivot point for the entire quest. It is the catalyst that finally breaks Edgar's paralysis, but it does so only after the damage is absolute. It is a symbol of the too late nature of the lands between. The questline forces the player to participate in this delay, making you a part of the tragic timing. You are the messenger of a dead hope. As Edgar clutches the paper and resolves to find his daughter, the player already knows that the road back is long and the shadows are growing. The letter was a plea for life, but it arrived in time to be an epitaph. The Leonine Misbegotten is the physical manifestation of the Revolt's success. You find him standing on the lonely, rain-swept beach at the rear of the castle, far from the noble quarters. He is a massive, mane-covered beast who radiates a primal and regal strength. Unlike the common Misbegotten who swarm the courtyard, the Leonine is a warrior of absolute focus. He wields the grafted blade greatsword, the very symbol of the Golden Order's military dominance, with a terrifying, natural grace. He is the liberator of his people, the one who took the Master's greatest weapon and turned it into a tool of freedom. There is a profound, poetic reversal in seeing this beast hold that specific sword. The grafted blade was made from the weapons of conquered champions to signify the end of resistance. By claiming it, the Leonine Misbegotten is signaling that the era of conquest is over. He has taken the soul of the castle and made it his own. In his mind, he is not a boss or a monster. He is a king reclaiming the primal strength of the crucible. He represents the raw, biological power of the ancient world rising up to reclaim the tools of its oppressors. He is the nightmare that Edgar feared the most, a slave who has become a legend. The fight with the Leonine is visceral and fast. He doesn't use the refined, tactical maneuvers of a knight. He uses the sheer weight of the sword and his own animalistic agility. He leaps and strikes with a ferocity that feels personal. He is fighting for every slave who was thrown into the pits, and every impure being who was denied a name. Every swing of that massive sword is an act of historical justice. He is the revolutionary leader who didn't just win a riot, but successfully decapitated the command of the peninsula. He is the champion of the broken. The fact that he is found at the beach is significant. It shows that he has pushed the masters all the way to the edge of the world. He has driven them into the sea. He stands there in the surf, a lone king on a lonely shore, holding a sword that is too heavy for any normal man to lift. He has achieved what should have been impossible. He has led a race of chattel to a military victory over the servants of the Erd Tree, but he is also a tragic figure. He has won a ruined castle on a dying peninsula. He is a king of ashes, holding a trophy that he cannot use to build a better future. When you defeat him, you take the grafted blade back, but the victory feels hollow. You are restoring a symbol of oppression to a man who has already lost everything else. The Leonine Misbegotten was the only character in the story who had a clear goal and achieved it. He rose up, he led his people, and he took the prize. His death at the hands of the Tarnished is the final cruelty of the story. It is the moment where the system reasserts itself, taking the sword away from the liberator and giving it back to the jailer. The Leonine died for a freedom that was as fleeting as the foam on the waves. Edgar's entire existence is defined by a binary choice that he simply cannot resolve until it is too late. On one side, there is his duty to his lord and the preservation of the grafted blade greatsword. On the other, there is his love for his daughter, Irina, and his responsibility to keep her safe. This is the quintessential failure of the Golden Order's philosophy. It demands that its servants value status and law above the basic preservation of life. Edgar chose the iron over the flesh. He stayed at his post because he believed that being a Castellan was more important than being a father. His justification was a classic rationalization of the devoted soldier. He told himself that by protecting the castle, he was protecting the order that made Irina's life possible. He believed that if he abandoned his post, he would be a coward who had failed his god. He was more afraid of the shame of a lost castle than he was of the grief of a lost child. This highlights the cold, dehumanizing nature of the Erdtree's service. It teaches you that your personal feelings are a weakness. It replaces your heart with a set of rigid instructions. Edgar followed those instructions to the letter, and that is why he failed. The tragedy of his choice is that it was based on a lie. The Golden Order he was serving was already broken. The Lord he was protecting the sword for was probably already dead or insane in the capital. He was guarding a relic of a dead age. His choice was not between duty and love, but between vanity and reality. He chose the vanity of a title. He chose to sit on a high chair in a burning building because the chair made him feel important. This choice is the moral rot at the heart of the peninsula. It shows how the hierarchy of the world destroys the very families it claims to protect. Edgar's choice also reflects a deep-seated fear of the misbegotten. He couldn't leave because he couldn't bear the thought of the vermin winning. His pride was tied to the idea that he was superior to the slaves. If he fled to save Irina, he would be admitting that the slaves had defeated him. He would be falling to their level. This racial and social arrogance is what truly kept him pinned to that rampart. He wasn't just guarding a sword. He was guarding his own sense of self-importance. He was a man who would rather lose his daughter than lose his dignity in the eyes of his enemies. Edgar's choice is the engine that drives the tragedy. If he had left the moment the revolt started, Irina would still be alive. If he had valued the living over the symbolic, the story would have had a happy ending. But in Elden Ring, no one chooses the living. Everyone chooses the symbol. Edgar's choice is a microcosm of the shattering itself. A group of demigods who chose to fight over shards of a ring while the world around them withered and died. Edgar is the human face of that cosmic mistake. He held the sword, but he let the world slip through his fingers. After you clear the castle and defeat the Leonine Misbegotten, you find Edgar in a new location. He has descended from his high rampart and is now sitting on a low rock near the beach, looking out at the water. He is exhausted, his armor is dented, and his voice is filled with a hollow, rhythmic quality. He is a man who has achieved his goal. The sword is safe, but he seems to have no idea what to do next. He is in a state of sunk cost delusion. He has lost his men and his fortress, so he clings to the sword with a desperate, white-knuckled grip because it is literally all he has left of his identity. His state of mind at the beach is one of profound psychological damage. He doesn't celebrate the recovery of the weapon. He speaks of duty as if it were a physical weight pulling him into the sand. He represents the absolute endpoint of a servant who has nothing left to serve. He is a commander without a garrison. The beach, with its grey waves, and silent shipwrecks is the perfect backdrop for his spirit. He is a shipwrecked man. He refuses to leave the beach until he is certain that the honor of the castle is preserved, still prioritizing the abstract reputation of a ruin over the reality of the daughter waiting for him. The conversation at the beach is a masterclass in tragic dialogue. He thanks the player, but there is no joy in his voice. He talks about the sword as if it were a holy relic, unaware that the player just took it from a beast who was wielding it better than he ever could. He is stuck in a loop of rationalization. He keeps telling himself that he did the right thing by staying. He is trying to convince himself that the sacrifice was worth it. He is a man who has lost his purpose, but refuses to admit that the purpose was a lie. He is guarding a ghost on a lonely shore. This encounter is the final moment where Edgar can still be considered a knight. Once he hears about Irina, this identity will shatter. But here, on the beach, he is still clinging to the Castellan mask. He is a symbol of the Golden Order's stubbornness. Even when the world has ended, its servants will still be standing at their posts, guarding empty rooms and broken swords. Edgar is a man who has been hollowed out by his own loyalty. He is a shell of a person, held together by the wax of his vows. He is waiting for a thank you from a god who isn't listening. Finding Edgar at the beach is the moment the player realizes the true scale of the tragedy. You have done what he asked. You have saved the sword. But looking at the broken man on the rock, you realize that the sword didn't save anything. It didn't bring back the dead, and it didn't fix the world. It just left a father alone on a beach while his daughter was sitting in the rain. The beach of lost grace is the graveyard of Edgar's honor. He has fulfilled his duty, and in doing so, he has guaranteed his own destruction. The sword is safe, but the man is lost. When the player finally hands Irina's letter to Edgar, the transformation is immediate and jarring. The rigid mask of the Castellan finally cracks. As he reads his daughter's words, her simple, blind plea for him to come home, the reality of his situation finally breaks through his delusion. The hunk of iron in his hand suddenly feels like the dead weight it is. He realizes that while he was playing at being a hero of the Erd Tree, he was neglecting the only person who truly needed him. The dialogue shifts from the cold language of duty to the panicked, desperate language of a father. He resolves to go to her immediately. He speaks of a future that he is already planning in his head, a life where he leaves the wars behind and spends the rest of his days taking care of Irina. He promises to make it up to her. He says, "My daughter awaits me," with a tone that is a mix of hope and profound guilt. This is the cruelest moment of the quest. For a few seconds, the player is allowed to believe that there might be a happy ending. Edgar is finally choosing the flesh over the iron. He is finally acting like a man instead of a tool. But the delivery of the letter is an act of tragic irony. By the time Edgar makes this decision, the clock has already run out. The player knows that the journey back to the Bridge of Sacrifice is long, and the peninsula is filled with the chaos that Edgar's own duty allowed to spread. His resolution is a day late and a world short. He is running toward a light that has already been extinguished. The letter was a lifeline, but Edgar spent too long staring at the sword before he decided to grab it. His choice is a hollow one, made in the shadow of a catastrophe that has already happened. The dialogue exchange here is a haunting reminder of Edgar's failure. He admits that he was blinded by his post. He acknowledges that he was a fool. This self-awareness is his punishment. He has to live with the knowledge that he had to be convinced to love his daughter more than his job. He is a man who required a stranger to do his fighting and a letter to find his heart. As he stands up and prepares to leave the beach, he looks like a man who is trying to outrun a storm that has already passed over him. He is a passenger in a tragedy of his own making. Delivering the letter is the moment where the quest ends and the horror begins. You have finished the objective, but you have triggered a sequence of events that will destroy Edgar completely. He is walking away from the castle to find a daughter who is no longer there. His promise to make it up to her is the most depressing line in the peninsula. It is a vow made to a ghost. As he walks toward the exit of the castle, he is leaving behind the only world he knew. You are heading toward a reality that will break his mind forever. The Castellan is dead, and the father is about to find out why. The return to the Bridge of Sacrifice is one of the most effective and harrowing moments in Elden Ring's world building. As you approach the rock where Irina was sitting, the silence is the first thing you notice. The blind girl who was once the only source of hope in the region is gone. In her place, you find a body lying in the mud, surrounded by the signs of a brief and brutal struggle. Irina has been murdered. She was killed on the very road where she was waiting for her father to save her. The weeping of the peninsula has finally claimed its most innocent victim. The discovery is horrifying because of its sheer pointlessness. Irina was not a warrior. She was a blind girl sitting on a rock. She was killed by a roving band of misbegotten, or perhaps common brigands. It doesn't even matter who did it. The tragedy is that she was left alone in a war zone because her father was too busy guarding a sword. The timing is the ultimate cruelty. If Edgar had left when she first fled, or if the player had arrived a day earlier, she would still be alive. Her death is the physical manifestation of the word too late. The evidence of violence is sparse but clear. This wasn't a noble execution. It was a messy, roadside killing. Irina died in the dirt, far from the light of the Erd tree and the comfort of her home. The player is left with a profound sense of helplessness. You cleared the castle, you killed the beast, and you delivered the letter. You did everything the game asked of you. But you couldn't prevent this. The world of Elden Ring does not reward your effort with safety. It rewards your effort with the realization that your actions are often irrelevant to the cruelty of the landscape. When Edgar arrives at the scene, the air of the peninsula seems to get colder. He finds his daughter's body, and the world he was trying to save through his duty finally collapses. He stands over her, a man who has recovered his honor but lost his soul. The irony of the quest is complete. The sword is safe in his inventory, but the daughter is dead in the mud. The grafted blade was supposed to be the symbol of his power, but it couldn't stop a single knife from finding his daughter's throat. He is a man who traded a life for a trophy, and he is finally seeing the bill. Ultimately, she's returning to Irina is the moment where the story of Castle Morne shifts from a military drama to a personal horror. This is the point of no return for Edgar. The sight of his daughter's corpse is the catalyst for the madness that will eventually consume him. He cannot blame the Golden Order, and he cannot blame the gods, so he is left with the crushing weight of his own failure. The road at the Bridge of Sacrifice is the end of the line for the family of Morne. Irina is dead, and the father she was waiting for is about to become a monster. He falls to his knees in the mud, the heavy armor that once symbolized his status now looking like a cumbersome cage. His dialogue is no longer the measured speech of a commander. It is a harrowing descent into pure, unadulterated grief. He repeats her name, touching the blood-stained rags she wore, realizing that the safety he promised her in his mind was a total delusion. The silence of the peninsula is broken by the cries of a man who has realized that his life's work was a lie. In his breakdown, Edgar begins to confront the weight of his failure. He whispers that she didn't deserve this, a line that carries a double meaning. On the surface, he is mourning her innocence, but underneath, he is admitting that she was sacrificed to his pride. He spent her final hours guarding a grafted blade that could do nothing to protect her. The duty he clung to has left him with a body in the dirt and an empty castle at his back. He is a man who has been stripped of his purpose, and in the vacuum left behind, a terrifying new emotion begins to grow. A pure, externalized rage. His grief is so potent that it begins to warp his reality. Because the guilt of his own choices is too heavy to bear, his mind starts to project that blame outward. He vows vengeance against the world, promising to hunt down every beast and brigand responsible for this act. But he is no longer talking about justice. He is talking about annihilation. He is looking for a target because he cannot stand to look at himself. His breakdown is the cracking of the vessel, making him the perfect candidate for the chaotic forces that wait in the shadows of the lands between. The player stands as a silent witness to this collapse. You delivered the letter that brought him here, making you the agent of his final misery. There is no option to comfort him or to help him bury her. The world of Elden Ring forces you to watch as he loses his mind. This scene highlights the absolute isolation of the characters in this world. Edgar is alone with his grief, and the rain of the peninsula continues to fall, indifferent to the fact that a family line has just been extinguished in the mud. The father has returned, but the knight is gone forever. This breakdown is the end of Edgar's humanity. When he finally stands up from Irina's body, he is no longer the man you met at the castle. He has become a hollow shell filled with a dark, flickering energy. He leaves the peninsula not to find a new life, but to find a way to make the rest of the world feel as much pain as he does. The weeping of the land has finally broken him. He is heading north toward Liurnia, and the trail he leaves behind is no longer one of duty, but of a madness that will eventually incinerate everything he ever stood for. Part 16. The Revenger's Shack. Edgar's descent into madness. Edgar eventually resurfaces in a remote corner of Liurnia, at a location that has been renamed by his own insanity, the Revenger's Shack. This is no longer the home of a knight or a noble. The shack is a grisly testament to his total descent into madness. It is filled with the raw meat of butchered animals and the corpses of those who had the misfortune of crossing his path. The environment is a visual representation of a mind that is completely rotted away. Edgar has abandoned the order of the Erd Tree in favor of a new, chaotic purpose. He is no longer protecting a sword, he is hunting the living. His new identity is Edgar the Revenger. He has traded his formal title for a name that reflects his singular obsession. He is no longer trying to fix the world or save his honor. He is trying to hurt the world back. The shack represents the stagnation of his grief. He has surrounded himself with the physical evidence of death because he can no longer imagine a world where life exists. He is a man who has grafted his pain onto his surroundings, turning a simple shelter into a temple of slaughter. He has become the very beast he once claimed to despise. The most disturbing element of the shack is the presence of the frenzied flame. The atmosphere is heavy with the yellow, flickering light of chaos Edgar has been claimed by the Three Fingers, the cosmic entity that feeds on despair and suffering. His grief over Irina was so intense that it acted as a beacon for the flame of frenzy. He didn't just lose his mind, he lost his soul to a god that wants to melt the world back into a single, agonizing mass. The Revenger's Shack is a wound in the landscape, where the madness of a father has become a physical infection. Edgar's equipment reflects this change. He still wears parts of his old armor, but it is rusted and stained with the blood of his victims. He carries the banished knight's halberd, a weapon that symbolizes his status as an exile. He has been cast out from the Golden Order, not by his masters, but by his own choices. He is a man who has chosen to live in the dirt, because that is where his daughter died. He has rejected the sun and the gold, choosing instead to bathe in the sickly yellow glow of the frenzy. He is a guardian of nothing but his own hatred. The Revenger's Shack is the graveyard of Edgar's legacy. It shows that in the lands between, duty leads to grief, and grief leads to madness. There is no middle ground. Edgar is the proof that the Golden Order provides no support for those who suffer under its laws. When his world collapsed, he had nowhere to turn but the flame. He is waiting in that shack for the player to arrive, not because he recognizes you, but because you are the final witness to his failure. The Castellan has become the Revenger, and the tragedy of Castle Morne is about to reach its final, violent conclusion. Part 17. Edgar the Revenger. Invading at Liurnia. When you approach the Revenger's Shack, the screen darkens and the familiar, chilling text appears. Involved by recusant Edgar. This is the final meeting between the player and the man who once sat atop the ramparts of Castle Morne. But this version of Edgar does not speak. He does not ask about the sword or his daughter. He charges at you with a feral, mindless aggression, his halberd swinging with a strength that is fueled by the frenzied flame. He is no longer a man, he is a red phantom, a spectral manifestation of a soul that has been completely consumed by hatred. Fighting the broken man is a somber experience. You can see the remnants of his skill, the tactical training of a commander, now being used for a purpose that is purely destructive. He uses the spinning strikes of his halberd, moving with a mechanical, joyless efficiency. There is no honor in this duel. You are simply putting down a rabid animal that used to be a knight. The tragedy of killing him is that you are the only one who remembers who he was. To everyone else in Liurnia, he is just another madman in a shack. To you, he is the father who stayed too long at his post. When he is defeated, his spirit fades away, leaving behind a few items that tell the final chapter of his story. He drops a shabriri grape, a physical manifestation of his madness. He also drops his +8 banished knight's halberd. This weapon is a powerful tool for the player, but it carries the stain of his tragedy. Taking his gear feels like looting a grave. You have inherited the tools of a man who lost everything to a lie. His death is a quiet, lonely affair in the middle of a swamp, far from the castle he tried so hard to protect. The tragedy of the invasion is that Edgar dies without ever achieving his revenge. He never found the people who killed Irina, and he never found a way to fix his heart. He died fighting a tarnished who tried to help him. His revenge was a circular, self-destructive path that led him right back to the violence he oversaw at the castle. He became the victim of the same chaos he once thought he could control. His death is the final severing of the questline, a moment of absolute finality where the family of Morne is officially wiped from the map of the world. Edgar the Revenger is the cautionary tale for the player. He shows what happens when you let the order of the world dictate your worth. He was a good soldier who became a monster because he didn't know how to be a person. His invasion is the final scream of a man who was built to serve and died because he had nothing left to serve but his own pain. As his phantom dissipates into the Liurnian mist, the story of the Castellan ends. The sword is gone, the daughter is gone, and now the father is gone. Only the grape remains. Part 18. The Shabriri Grapes. What happened to Irina's eyes? One of the most disturbing revelations in the questline comes from the items Edgar and Irina leave behind. The Shabriri Grapes. In the world of Elden Ring, these are not fruit. They are distilled eyeballs of those who died in a state of absolute agony and madness. The lore text describes them as being cooked from within by the frenzied flame. The fact that we find one near Irina's body and another on Edgar's corpse implies a horrific physical reality. Their eyes were literally consumed by the chaos god. Their tragedy wasn't just a personal loss, it was a biological harvest for the Three Fingers. The implication for Irina is particularly dark. She was born blind, yet the frenzied flame found a way to use her eyes regardless. It suggests that her eyes were gouged out or transformed after her death. The grape found near her is the physical residue of her suffering. It implies that the brigands who killed her might have been agents of the flame, or that her grief was so pure it attracted the frenzy even in the moments after her heart stopped beating. Irina's innocence was not a shield, it was an accelerant. She provided the sweetness that the chaos god craves. For Edgar, the grape is the proof of his total corruption. By the time he reached Liurnia, his eyes were already burning with the yellow light. When you kill him, the grape is all that is left of his vision. He saw the world as a place that deserved to burn, and the Three Fingers turned that vision into a physical object. The Shabriri grape is a manifestation of celestial nihilism. It shows that the gods of this world do not care about your duty or your honor. They only care about the intensity of your pain. The family of Morne was nothing more than a crop to be harvested. These items link the story of Castle Morne to the wider cosmic horror of the frenzied flame ending. The grapes are used to feed Hieta, a mysterious maiden who seeks to see the light. By feeding her the remains of Irina and Edgar, the player is participating in the digestion of their tragedy. You are taking the eyes of a broken family and using them to fuel a journey toward the total incineration of reality. The Shabriri grape is the ultimate unmaking of the human form. It turns a person's most intimate sense, their sight, into a tool for a blind god. Ultimately, the Shabriri grapes are the final proof that no one wins in the story of the peninsula. Irina and Edgar didn't just die, they were processed. Their lives were reduced to a pair of yellow, squishy objects that help a stranger burn the world down. This is the darkest secret mentioned in the introduction. The systemic horror of the Golden Order gave way to the cosmic horror of the frenzied flame. The eyes of the blind daughter and the eyes of the mad father are now part of the same chaotic cycle. The grapes are the bitter fruit of a tree that was never allowed to grow in the sun. Part 19. Hieta's connection. Is she Irina reborn? Shortly after Irina's death, a mysterious woman named Hieta appears near the lake-facing cliffs in Liurnia. The connection is impossible to ignore. Hieta uses the exact same character model and voice actress as Irina. She is also blind, wears the same humble clothing, and possesses the same gentle melodic way of speaking. She claims to be a finger maiden who is seeking the distant light of the three fingers. However, she has no memory of the peninsula or Edgar. This creates one of the most debated mysteries in the lore. Is Hyetta a reincarnation of Irina, or is she a puppet inhabited by a different force? The most common theory is that the three fingers, or the entity known as Shabriri, she took possession of Irina's fresh corpse. In Elden Ring, the body is often treated as a vessel that can be inhabited by different souls or spirits. Hyetta's need for Shabriri grapes to see the light is a direct link to the eyeballs of the dead. By eating the grapes, she is ingesting the suffering of others to gain a new kind of divine sight. If she is Irina, then her rebirth is a cruel mockery. The innocent girl who just wanted her father is now a vessel for a god that wants to burn her father's world to ash. Hyetta's journey mirrors Irina's potential path. She is a girl who is constantly moving, constantly seeking, and constantly relying on the player's guidance. But where Irina's story was one of domestic tragedy, Hyetta's story is one of cosmic apocalypse. She represents the transformation of grief into religious fervor. She doesn't realize that the grapes she is eating are the eyes of people like her. She thinks they are light. This highlights the blinding nature of the frenzied flame. It turns the most horrific realities into a beautiful, divine mission. The community theories often point to the fact that Hyetta only appears after Irina is dead. This suggests a direct soul transference or a reanimation of the flesh. If the three fingers can manipulate the order of life and death, then Irina was the perfect candidate. Her death was so unfair, and her grief was so potent that she became the perfect bridge for the Chaos God. Hyetta is the ghost of the peninsula, haunting the player across the map. She is a reminder that in this world, even in death, you are not safe from being used as a tool by the gods. The connection between Irina and Hyetta is the final cruelty of the quest. It means that Irina never found peace in the roots of the Erd tree. Her soul was intercepted and her body was recycled. Whether she is a reincarnation or a possession, she is no longer the girl on the rock. She is a herald of the end. Hyetta is the beautiful mask that the frenzied flame wears to lead the player into the abyss. By following her, you are following the remains of a girl who just wanted to go home, and she is leading you to a place where home no longer exists. Part 20. The Frenzied Flame. Irina's soul consumed. The story of Castle Morne eventually feeds into the most destructive force in the lands between, the Frenzied Flame. This is an outer god that represents the absolute rejection of life's complexity. It seeks to melt all disparity, life and death, joy and pain, individual souls, back into a single, primordial, great one. It is a god of total entropy. Irina and Edgar's story is the entry point for this cosmic horror. Their personal tragedy is used as a case study for why the world should be incinerated. The three fingers argue that since life is filled with such unbearable suffering, it is better if life does not exist at all. Hyetta's questline is the player's primary guide toward the frenzied flame ending. As you feed her the grapes, the eyes of her former self and her father, you are participating in the consumption of Irina's soul. She becomes the Maiden of Frenzy, the one who validates the player's decision to burn the world. The implication is that the order of the Erd tree failed her so badly that her soul was hollowed out and replaced by the chaos. Irina is no longer a victim. She is the proof that the world is broken beyond repair. She has been consumed by a god that feeds on her trauma. The entity known as Shabriri is the architect of this corruption. Shabriri is said to be the most loathed man in history, a spirit that inhabits the bodies of the dead to spread the madness. He likely orchestrated the events on the peninsula to produce the grapes he needed. He uses the tragedy of the blind daughter to manipulate the player's emotions. He whispers that the only kindness left in the world is to burn it all away. Irina's soul is the fuel for his argument. He turns her murder into a political statement against the greater will. This cosmic horror element elevates the story of Castle Morne from a small revolt to a universal threat. The frenzied flame is the ultimate consequence of the Golden Order's cruelty. By enslaving the misbegotten and ignoring the suffering of people like Irina, the gods created the void that the chaos god filled. The flame of frenzy is the ash of the Erdtree's failures. Irina's story is the spark. Her soul was not just lost, it was weaponized. She is the reason the player might choose to become the Lord of Frenzied Flame, burning the world to avenge a girl who died in the dirt. The Frenzied Flame is the dark mirror of the Golden Order. If the Order is forced unity through law, the Flame is forced unity through destruction. Neither provides a home for Irina. Her soul was consumed by a god that offers peace through extinction. The tragedy of Castle Morne is that it provided the excuse for the end of the world. Irina and Edgar are the first casualties of a fire that intends to swallow the sun. Their story ends not in the light of the stars, but in the total, silent incineration of everything that ever was. Part 21. The Misbegotten's Fate. Still slaves in the New World. The most bitter irony of the Castle Morne story is that the slave revolt, despite its local success, changed absolutely nothing for the Misbegotten as a race. Even with the castle in ruins and the masters dead, the Misbegotten remain a cursed and oppressed underclass throughout the rest of the lands between. Their victory at Morne was a localized explosion of rage, but it was not a revolution that changed the order of the world. Outside the peninsula, they are still seen in places like the Haligtree or the outskirts of Lendal, still serving as low-level guards, still being hunted and still being denied the dignity of a name. Their fate in the Haligtree is particularly telling. Michaela's sanctuary was supposed to be a place for the unwanted and the impure, but even there, the misbegotten are found at the bottom of the hierarchy. They are guards and laborers, still separated from the higher beings of the tree. This suggests that the stain of the crucible is so deep that even the most compassionate god cannot fully erase it. The misbegotten's revolution at Morne was a scream into the void. They killed their jailers, but they couldn't kill the idea that they were monsters. They are still enemies you fight everywhere, trapped in a cycle of perpetual combat. This stagnation of their status highlights the futility of their violence. They rose up, they butchered the soldiers, and they took the sword. But they didn't know how to build a world that wasn't a prison. They are beasts in the eyes of the world, because the world refuses to let them be anything else. Their revolt was a suicide mission for their own humanity. By killing the masters, they became the monsters that the Golden Order said they were. They are now the fallen, living in the ruins of a fortress they don't know how to repair. They are still slaves, but now they are slaves to their own animalistic rage. The cycle continues because the order of the world is built on the need for another. The Golden Order needs the misbegotten to be impure so that it can feel pure. This biological and spiritual hierarchy is a law of the universe that a single castle revolt cannot break. The Misbegotten at Morne are eventually hunted down by the player or other tarnished, their victory erased as the peninsula is cleaned of its infestation. Their story is a reminder that in Elden Ring, rebellion often just leads to a different kind of ash. They are a race that has been marked for suffering, and the road to the Erd Tree has no room for them. The Misbegotten's fate is the final verdict on the slave revolt. It was a tragedy of power without purpose. They had the strength to kill, but they didn't have the grace to be free. They remain a beastly underclass, a reminder of the Crucible's unmaking of the world. Their revolution meant nothing in the grand scheme of the gods. They are still found in the gutters of the capital, still guarding the gates of their oppressors. The fire at Morne has gone out, and the Misbegotten are still sitting in the rain, waiting for a new world that will never see them as anything more than property. Part 22. Final verdict, a story. Where everyone lost, the story of Castle Morne is the most depressing and perfectly realized microcosm of Elden Ring's world. It is a narrative where every character's virtue became their downfall. Edgar's duty was his executioner. Irina's innocence was her accelerant. The Misbegotten's strength was their curse. It is a story where the pursuit of order led to a nightmare, and the pursuit of justice led to a massacre. At the end of the questline, there are no heroes, no winners, and no survivors. The castle is a ruin, the road is a graveyard, and the souls of the family are fuel for a chaos god. Edgar lost his daughter, his honor, and his sanity. He died as a revenger in a swamp. Far from the light, he tried so hard to serve. Irina lost her life on a rock. Her blindness used to guide a lord toward the total destruction of the world. The Misbegotten won their freedom, only to find that they had no place to go and no way to be human. The grafted blade greatsword, the prize everyone fought over, is just a heavy hunk of iron in the player's inventory, a trophy of a tragedy that didn't need to happen. It is a verdict of absolute horizontal loss. Thematic summary of the tragedy is the failure of hierarchy. The Golden Order's attempt to categorize and control life led to the unmaking of the peninsula. By refusing to see the Misbegotten as people, the gods guaranteed the violence that would eventually destroy their fortress. By refusing to see his daughter as his priority, Edgar guaranteed her death. The law and the status of the world were the venom that killed the family of Morne. It is a story that proves that loyalty to a broken system is just a slow-form suicide. Castle Morne stands as a silent monument to this failure. It is a place where the order collapsed and the chaos took root. It is the birthplace of the Lord of Frenzied Flame. The tragedy of the blind daughter is the emotional heart of the apocalypse. It shows that the small deaths on the road are what eventually lead to the big fire at the end of the world. The Weeping Peninsula is the only name that fits. It is a land that can do nothing but mourn for the people who died for a sword and the people who killed for a name. Ultimately, the story of Castle Morne is a warning. It says that the order of the world is only as strong as its weakest link. By ignoring the suffering of the low, the high ensure their own destruction. Irina and Edgar are the ghosts of the Golden Order, a reminder that the cost of your divine destiny is often the life of the person standing right next to you. The quest ends in silence, in a swamp with a grape and a sword. It is the coldest story in the lands between, a place where duty is a death sentence, and the only grace is the fire that burns it all away.